got things all in order. Thanks for waffling while I click the right buttons. It looks like the stream is working as well, and that's good because I've played with some settings. Oh, I've learned a lot, Learned a lot. Right, here we go. Record that. Roll the music. Hi everyone, welcome to the Remain Indoors podcast, where we talk about some science news today because we've got Dr. Holding, we complain bitterly about our lives, and we overshare our fundamental human flaws. Remain indoors. There we go, and I'm joined by Matt Two Rumpets. How do you like me riffing there? A little bit of a on-the-fly, different riffing intro, still perfectly timed.
As always, I remain impressed with your impeccable radio-ness over that intro.
I'm practicing. I've been practicing. Well, that's, John, to be honest, Remain Indoors, it started off like that, didn't it? Because I was kind of unceremoniously booted off the air, although I did go back, so I have been there. But my little Saturday time slot got murdered by the COVID reshuffle, and sort of Remain Indoors was a bit of a, all right, let's stay on the mic, let's keep going.
Yeah, and I think it was kind of for both of us, let's continue to improve our, I hate to use the word teamwork, that's not quite it, but basically our ability to work together in an improvisational fashion and still be interesting.
See if there's any kind of flow, see if we can keep flow going and make sure there's no pause in...
right, so we don't interrupt each other.
I know the Katoko, yeah, and so things don't go dead and awkward. Yeah, but it's been good. Exactly. It's been good. And it'll be nearly a year between when we started and when the Prime Minister has announced that schools might reopen again and COVID restrictions might start drawing to an end. I think it's definitely going to be a year of Remain Indoors. So it's been pretty good. But we will review where we are, I would say, end of March, and we'll review if Remain Indoors has a place in the schedule.
All right, sounds fair to me, but I kind of hope it does because I enjoy doing it regardless of its greater success.
All right, but I say we go full on, like, I think people enjoyed your politics chat last week. I think we go full on political hot takes. So you sit there as like the Dem, the compassionate, liberal softy. I'm going to go fully to the other side. I'm like just going to go fully like... People should pull themselves up by the bootstraps. It's your own fault if you're poor. Everyone look out for themselves. I'm just going to go like the full-on opposite, shock jock, and we can just have debates.
You know what was interesting? I hate to bring up our other more successful show, Mr. Apex, but we did talk about young drivers. And I went full-on Marco. And I was surprised. I thought more people would really have slammed me for that.
Well, no one listens. That's fine.
I guess not. No one's paying attention at the time, but I'm surprised at the lack of angry comments about how young drivers are treated when I said, well, it is Formula One and they are at the top.
There was actually a couple of YouTube comments in there saying, oh, stop trying to surround young drivers in wool. It's a business, etc., etc. So you're not looking hard enough. Don't worry. There's always people slating you on the internet. I'll encourage it, in fact. I'll do my best to encourage it. One man that I will not hear any insults or slating against is our guest, Dr. Andrew Holding, who is a saint. Hello, Dr. Holding.
Hello. That was a big introduction.
Well,
as someone who's raised Catholic.
I think, were you raised Catholic also?
Yeah, I was an altar boy and everything.
Oh, wow. So my mum is from a Roman Catholic family. So whilst I've had limited experience in a Catholic church, there is certainly like a lot of guilt. I was definitely raised that Jesus is definitely always watching you, whatever you're doing. So I'm sure we share that in common.
I mean, the weird thing about a Catholic church is when I grew up, of course, they still believe that you actually ate and drank the body and blood of Christ. So basically, every week I was taken to do cannibalism. It was
that's weird, isn't it?
Thing to get your head
so
around
it actually turned into the body and blood of Christ as you were consuming it?
No, in the Mass, when they do the service, there's a moment called transubstantiation, and that's when it converts into the actual body and blood of Christ. And I think they decided a few years ago that it doesn't actually.
It's a bit grim, that, isn't it?
It was a big part of Catholicism over the Church of England said, no, it's just symbolic.
Matt?
So actual cannibalism and not symbolic cannibalism.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
They claimed it was actually, but it definitely tasted like wine and bread. So
it did. Well, hang on a minute. So is that the same in the Church of England? Because I did most of my churching actually in a Protestant church, and you would get like a little hard tack, and a sip of wine. So that's not trans Jesus-mification.
So this is one of the key differences. Is when I was raised Catholic, it was the Catholic Church said yes, it absolutely is,
Right.
and the other churches went that is ridiculous.
Oh, okay. So the Catholic Church kind of just followed along. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So you've got that. There's definitely a lot of like quirks with Catholicism when compared to Church of England. So like I've flip-flopped between the two, and my mum converted, if you like, so that we'd all go to the same church. And she used to sort of describe it a bit like Christianity light. A lot of the rules were guidelines. There was a lot less like hell and damnation. There was none of that really, not the fire and brimstone. It was all about the New Testament, really. It was all the good news Bible. And don't worry, you've been saved. You're going to a better place. Everything's fine as long as you say sorry. Whereas the Catholic side was kind of like, you are a terrible person and you will pay, and unless you fess up now.
For me, because obviously had people I would go into the Church of England services with, and I remember after church you would sometimes have like the sort of church hall gathering. And I think one of the key things for me was the biggest thing about the C of E I remember is basically it was orange squash and a cup of tea. Yep. And that basically defined the Church of England. Catholic Church, not so much. That's the polite. If you've got nothing nice to say.
No, I went to Sunday school all throughout my childhood, and it was very. You're right. It was very squash and cake, and it was all very social, and it was all very pleasant. So we'd have our Sunday school where we'd learn about the miracles and all that, and then towards the end of the real grown-up service, all the kids would kind of get traipsed in from colouring in and having fun and playing and drinking squash. Then this is the bit like, shh, you got to be super quiet now. And then you join in with like some hymns at the end and pretend you knew the words. And I honestly, like, I don't want to slate church services, but as a kid, that is murder. Even the end bit was murder. Matt, did you get dragged to churchy stuff as a kid?
Yeah, I did.
What kind? Yeah, what brand?
Episcopal, which is sort of the American branch of Church of England.
Oh, okay.
Kind of the same thing. It was sort of religion light. It was all very, as much as you're describing, compassionate, New Testament based. Services weren't that long. People were generally friendly. And, as with everything else, as I got older, I just sort of, had a few questions that were unanswerable and sort of moved on with my life, as it were.
Yeah, I too got to the point where I would rather have questions I couldn't answer than answers I couldn't question. I think, oh, by the way, if my mum's listening, I do definitely still go to church, and yeah, I believe in all of it, Mum. But she changed from Church of England, I think after my dad passed away. She went to all the, what do you call it, where you've got loads of music and like real high energy, evangelical. Is that right?
Right.
Evangelical? Yeah. Is that the term for it? Where it really is like loads of like a lot of like African, black British, black American inspired gospel type music. Just wonder, I don't know the name of it, and I'm going to offend someone.
I think there's quite a few of them. I mean, I come across it in US context more.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, for me, because it's quite a lot of the people I know who had a lot more sort of joyful stuff. They were Baptists, but I think that's very much depends on where in the world you are, what we are. One of the big things for me though was when I must have been in my teenagers, and it was discovering that not all of the different denominations of of Christians baptize as kids. And as a Catholic, you absolutely baptize your baby as soon as possible. Otherwise, they go to limbo. I think, again, they've rescinded this one. So it was a huge thing that unbaptized babies are bad. And then you meet a Baptist who doesn't get baptized till they're 15, 16. It's like, that makes no sense. And it's quite interesting because obviously you're told absolutely this is the right thing. And then people who believe in pretty much the same thing totally disagree.
Are you baptized, Andrew?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been baptized as well. You baptized, Matt?
Yep.
Oh, I was hoping you were going to say no, and then I could mock you for your soul not being saved or something. But then I did the Church of England, and I think I've definitely told this story, so I won't do it again. But I went to the Church of England, where then you had to be confirmed. I guess that's like a bar mitzvah type thing, and they wouldn't confirm me because I wasn't good enough.
Oh dear.
I failed.
Sad. Sad. No, you've made me think of a scene from a movie I watched way back about New York stuff. and the protagonist is in a bar with a cop who is Irish and Catholic. And he's like, I've never been baptized. He's like, well, you should. He talks him into being baptized, and he baptizes him with whiskey on the spot. And he goes, well, what's that do for me? He goes, well, now, he says, before you couldn't go to hell, but now you definitely will.
Love it. Taylor Messer in the live chat. Hello, live chat. By the way, it's quite busy live chat today. Says, I grew up Southern Baptist, and it's centered around a fat man screaming fire and brimstone, and then we'd go eat. That, I guess that's, yeah, when you said Baptist there, that's what jumped into my head as well, Andrew, like the real, like, and the mountain shall explode, and it's because of you, sinner, sir. Is that kind of trope, if you like.
To be honest, I just get amazed at the US mega churches. Have you seen pictures of them?
No. What? Yeah, well, yeah, I have seen pictures of it, but what makes it a mega church?
It's basically the equivalent of something the size of a shopping centre that's also a church. It's just phenomenal. And if anyone has any doubt that there's money in religion, go look at one, because you do not build that from a community getting together and just going, let's put some stones up.
Oh, yeah, no, wasn't there some guy busted, Matt, who was like, I need to fund my helicopter, and like people who were like paying for his private jets and stuff?
I think, Oliver on HBO did a pretty wonderful expose on that some time back. But yeah, there is always been lots of money in religion, and you can even go ask, the Vatican in Rome exactly how much they rake in every year from all of their subsidiaries around the world.
So that, whilst respecting that anyone can have the belief they want, and as long as it generally leads to being kind to other people and not interfering with other people's right to exist as they are, we can all agree that that's fine and even lovely and great for society in some ways. But a lot of those clearly are scams, and that's what we're going to be talking about today, Dr. Holding. Do you like that segue? Yep. That's all right, isn't it? Like, I found a segue and got straight into it. Even skipping another topic, that is show running on the fly. I was going to talk about boozing, but we'll skip straight into our main topic now, because we want to talk a bit about scams. And what led us there was that weird story about Reddit and stock markets. So I want to get Matt to summarize that story for me. But generally, the story going around on Twitter, the gist of it is a bunch of Reddit people managed to win big over a big hedge fund somehow.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to try and do the TLDR thing here, which means I'm leaving out a lot of details that I am dying to explain. Only if you promise to let me explain a few of them later on.
We'll roll back to the details.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. In essence, some hedge funds thought that GameStop, the retail business, was a bad bet. And so they bet heavily against it by taking what's known as a short position. And the only problem they encounter with that position is that at a certain point, you have to be able to give stock to people. Reddit found this hedge fund out and realized that because there weren't a lot of shares of stock floating around, that if they bought enough shares, they would be able to squeeze this hedge fund and drive the price up. Because if I need to buy stock and there's not many shares, what happens to the price? Supply and demand, price goes up. And they got so many people on board that they did that exact thing, and they took a stock that was almost worthless and have driven it north of $300 a share, which is almost put that hedge fund out of business at this point. And I think that's a reasonable and concise summary of what happened.
So, apologies to anyone who really understands all this stuff, but I've got a notebook here. I'm going to be noting down the questions I need to ask and stopping you at various points. So let's start with short selling. Dr. Holding, could you explain to someone as simple as me what short selling is?
So there's lots of complexity in this, but the really, really simple, overly simple answer is, say you want to buy a share in the future. If I'm short selling it, that means I predict it's going to be worth less tomorrow than it is today. And I agree to supply you on a certain day, a certain amount of shares at a certain price, and less than the amount it is today. That's the short selling. I expect it to go down.
Okay. So let's take that example then. So I see the GameStop shares at $5, and I think GameStop is going down the toilet, because who goes to a store in general, let alone to buy video games? So I think that in 6 months it's going to be $3. So I say to you, I agree to sell you GameStop shares in 6 months for $4. Is that what I do? I guarantee the price for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and you guarantee a certain number because you do predict there's a limited number. You don't, so you can't. And so you basically say, and it's where me knowing because in 4 months I want some shares. I can guarantee the price. The other person makes a profit, but they also take a risk.
Okay, but what do you get
from? This is
from
what futures are about. You're selling something in the future, but you don't necessarily own it at that time.
Okay, but what do you, as the person I'm short selling to, what do you gain out of me promising you rubbish stock at a slightly lower price than it is now? I guess you're betting that it's going to go up a bit, and you're going to definitely get them at $4.
Or just a guaranteed price.
Oh, okay.
If you want to manage your portfolio or whatever, think of it a bit like a fixed rate interest mortgage on your house. Interest rates go up and down. You usually pay a bit more to fix the interest rate when you get a mortgage,
okay,
because you can budget for the next 6 months. It's a bit like that, except when you're a hedge fund, you're working a bit differently.
Okay, so the hedge fund, Matt, has gotten a bunch of GameStop futures shorts. So they have sold futures hoping that it will go down, which, I mean, naturally it probably would have done. So this was a reasonable bet this hedge fund has taken, I guess. So where's that gone wrong? What's the problem? They are set to, at some point, sell shares for a lower value to the people that they've sold the shorts to. Oh my God, stop talking, Spanners.
Well, they've run into two problems. The first is the CEO of another business felt like the stock was being undervalued. Now, I'm not talking about its current valuations, but he looked at it and said, no, I think there's value in GameStop. I'm buying a chunk of the business and I'm taking over.
Oh.
So they immediately ran into some headwinds because basically the way the game is played, you take these short positions and then your analyst goes on to CNBC, for example, allegedly, we understand, and says, oh, GameStop, it's a retail business. It has no online presence. It can't possibly be worth anything. So you basically go and you shill that this stock will be worthless, trying to get people to dump their positions so that you wind up with the target price that you want.
Wait, that's a really good idea. So, but is that illegal? It's got to be illegal to do that, isn't it?
No. It's legal within certain boundaries, and they're quite good at following the boundaries.
Okay.
But what we'll get to is what has actually happened. If it hadn't been done on Reddit, would definitely be illegal.
Okay, so for example, like if I short sold against my own business and then started like running the business into the ground,
that's insider trading.
Oh, okay, so that's a very, very different.
And there are ways around insider trading by what you announce and what you tell people. And there are, if you're doing financial exams, one of the classic questions is if you see a company's headquarters on fire and you run home and immediately sell your shares in them, is that insider trading?
Yes.
No, public information.
Oh, because it's in the public domain. Because the fire is in the public.
If, however, the fire was still inside the building, presumably, I'm getting a bit tenuous here, and someone phoned you, my waste paper bin's about to catch fire and take the building out, and I've also thrown petrol on it by mistake, that would be insider trading because the guy has phoned you. And courts exist to work out what the actual answer is.
Okay, Matt, has anyone done anything illegal in this story so far?
No. So what I'm describing to you by that analyst going on to television to talk down the stock or to talk up the stock, depending upon what they've done, is the advantage that the Wall Street funds have. They have these massive platforms that amplify this information to the whole financial community. So they can convince a bunch of people like you and me, individual investors, to think, oh, the stock is bad, I should probably sell that. And then they make a lot of money off of us doing that. So we're constantly being played because they have access to a platform that we don't have access to. I can't get on CNBC and say, I've looked at the fundamentals and yeah, it's not the greatest stock, but this guy is completely wrong about how worthless it really is because of X, Y, and Z in the statements, for example.
Okay, so the first thing they came up against was another company or another human saying, actually, I think I can make a good run of GameStop, which is the opposite of what you want if you want it to run down into the ground and fail. But where do the Redditors come into it?
Well, this particular Reddit sub, which is called Wall Street Bets, basically they exist like a financial community. They get together, someone shows up with an idea. If everyone gets on board, they jump in whole hog. And there have long been groups of people who invest together. They pool their money and they bring research and they decide on a stock and they buy it and they hold it and they put portfolios together this way. A friend of mine does this by email with a bunch of his friends, but it's a Reddit sub, so it's kind of huge. And what happened was first of all, the Redditors grew up at GameStop, so they were kind of personally incensed that one of their favorite childhood things would be taken down. And second of all, they discovered that these hedge funds had all shorted GameStop, and not by a little bit, but to the point where they owed more shares of stock than were actually circulating.
Oh.
Yeah. And they realized that if they bought up enough of the remaining stock that was currently floating around, that the price would have to go up when they had to sell the stock. So my short sale has a due date, and then I have to give you 100 shares of stock. If there's 100 shares right now and Reddit buys 75, I'm paying a real premium for those other 25 to try and satisfy my contract. So the price goes up and up and up. And if you're on the other side of that bet, the more that price goes up, the more money I make, because I bought it back when the stock was cheap.
Okay, so see if I can understand this, Dr. Holding. Right, so the short sellers don't actually buy anything yet. They're gambling that it's going to be lower when it's time to fulfill. So that's really unlucky then that these Reddit guys figured out what they were doing. So if they had to then get the 100 shares to sell on, the Reddit people have made it so they're not available. I guess they can then hold them to ransom, can they?
But I think a key point here is Reddit needs to organize to do this. And what happened, I would say, is the equivalent of a Bernie Sanders internet meme for stock market buying. Because if you actually organize like this, and you actually formed an organization to literally do this to the market, it's very close to, if not becomes, again, this is where I'm only being careful because if someone could get upset with what I'm saying, it starts to sound like what's called a pump and dump, where you literally pump the market price up and then you dump the shares at peak, which obviously requires a little bit of skill.
Yeah.
But the reason why it's illegal is if you pump the market like here, what the big players will do is the person with the largest stake will be one who collapses it, and everyone else loses because they bought on the way up, and it will drop back to before all this happened. And the real risk here for a lot of Redditors is the ones who've gone long bit for a laugh.
Yeah.
Is they will not sell in time, and the market is going to crash when the people dump. And this happens with Bitcoin all the time. And Bitcoin, the warning is there is no pump and dump laws on it because it's not a real thing as far as the financial market is concerned.
Matt.
So I just want to take exception with the word unlucky. They found in filing documents this short position, and what's called a short squeeze is a classic financial maneuver. And the fact that they're basing it on the short positions and outstanding shares of stock is what I think keeps it from being a classic pump and dump, because there was a real financial play involved there that was available to anyone who cared to look through the public records.
Oh, I agree. There was but I think a small number of people have managed to drive it. And I think what's interesting is if you go look at the posts, the people warning this looks like a pump and dump get told down as being, it literally has that very much internet main thing, which no one can control.
Yeah.
Where people, if they do it, they get told, oh no, you're fake news, oh, you're Wall Street. And actually the warnings about this being a pump and dump there's nothing wrong with them. It doesn't mean you agree with them, but you can see the polarization when you go back in the posts.
So what is to stop it being actually an organized thing, and they've used that Reddit group to get people to do their pump and dump for them, and then they know that they need to get out quickly before it collapses. In fact, they even precipitate the collapse by going, yeah, it's at the level we want it now. We'll sell it to the short sellers at the inflated rate because they're minimizing their losses at that point, the short sellers, I take it. And then they're out, and then you've got a bunch of Reddit people holding the baby. Is that the risk, is it? So what's to stop that being like another con man coming in and just using that Reddit group?
Because, I mean, I think one of the things is it's finding the evidence to prove that this was organized at that level. And also, I think you can reasonably argue you can't control Reddit. So, you can't pick when everything's going to happen. So there's enough evidence that the people put their short squeeze hypothesis forward. As Matt says, that was public information. That was fine.
Yeah.
But, it's going to end up with, if someone wants to challenge this, it's not going to be what my opinion is as a non-financial person. It's going to be the lawyers in courts. But this has happened before. So a few years ago, German law is slightly different from US law. Porsche decided they wanted to buy out VW. A load of people had already shorted VW. In German law, if you're planning to do a buyout, you don't have to tell anyone, apparently. it may have changed. You do in like the US. Porsche then just bought up all the shares, but they had also bought shares from the people shorting it. So what Porsche did in their buyout was they bought over 100% of the available shares. And this happened to the VW shares. So that was exactly the same thing. And that was a squeeze, but that was also using the fact in German law, if you're going to go for that sort of aggressive buyout, you don't need to tell anyone at the time.
Wow. See, Matt, Reddit can't be organized. It would be terrible to get a massive subreddit with over 1 million users and try to organize as part of a team to corral the content into that subreddit to be in an organized and coherent way with a dedicated editorial team. Only a fool would try and do that, Matt.
On the other hand, if you present well-developed content to a large enough audience and enough people are convinced by it, then you have a hit on your hand. And we can see by the other stocks they're talking about, AMC, which is a theater chain, Bed Bath & Beyond, which is a retail housewares chain. I think they are settling on looking for where the industrial players in the market have taken these massive short positions that probably undervalue the actual assets of a company, and realizing that if they target them, if enough people jump on the choo-choo train, that they can win time and time and time again, because so many people will, as you say, get on the bandwagon. In fact, the essential motto is follow the flow, i.e. the flow of capital really determines stock price, not the underlying fundamentals and values anymore, which used to be what everyone sort of looked at before they bought a stock.
Oh, I couldn't agree more.
But I think your comment about how they're going against the industry, contrarian investors existed as a thing. They've been around for decades. So they aren't doing anything new. I think it is, what's surprising is the number of people there who are willing to sort of do the YOLO, I don't care if I lose this money, because a lot of small amounts of money can just be fun. And they like the fact they're sticking two fingers up at the big investors, I guess.
So Lucas in the chat tells us a friend of his has already made $18,000 with the shenanigans.
Wait a minute, real $18,000 or $18,000 if he sells? Because that's a big difference, isn't it?
He said made $18,000, which to me implies he sold. And the second thing to understand when we're talking about big and small amounts of money, you're like, it's Reddit. How many gatrillionaires can really afford to play this game? But I think it's important to understand that when we're talking about options, either short or long, what you have is massive leverage. So if I want to buy a share at $10, I have to spend $10. So if I want 100 shares, it's $1,000. But if I buy a call option, which basically is I'm going to bet that the stock goes up, and if it does, I make money, I can buy that same share for $1. So for my $10, I can now have 100 shares instead of one. And then if the price does go up, that leverage earns me a lot more money. So I don't have to have a huge amount of money to play on the stock going upside, because if it doesn't go up, I just don't buy the stock and I lose the $100 that I bet.
All right, we do risk getting bogged down here. I want to find out how this can personally benefit me. And I've always had an interest in, I have an interest in gambling in general. When the fun stops, stop. But I have owned shares before. So I don't know if anyone else here has. But what was your point there, Matt?
Lucas just confirmed that his friend did indeed sell, and that is a profit.
Okay, good. So this must have been maybe 8-9 years ago now. We had little kids and we'd managed to save money, because when you have little kids, your life becomes terrible and you can't do anything. So we ended up we looked in the bank one day and went, we've built up a few grand. And before that, we'd been like living month to month. And we went, it's because we don't do anything. We're not going out. We're not going to the pub. So I asked permission to the accountant. I said, can I buy £1,000 worth of shares? Because my friend does it, and he used this website and app, which I can't even remember now, but it was quite good. It let you get on, for smaller amounts of money, because I guess they broke on a big scale, and you would pay a fee for every transaction, so you'd have to think about transactions. But it was quite fun. I spent £1,000 on shares, and what did I get? I got Yahoo, just as it was being taken over by, I think, Melissa Meyer, if I'm remembering my Yahoo history correctly, Netflix, and NatWest Bank, or Royal Bank of Scotland, or whatever it was at the time. And they were doing reasonably well, but then I had to get out of the game because another baby, golf, etc. But it's always something I've been curious about doing. Do you have time to dabble, Dr. Holding?
So I mean, I actually just sold them because I'm trying to sort out a deposit for a house. But I've kept some money for the last few years in shares. But my reason was that basically the UK economy has been doing nothing on interest. And I want to make some money. I didn't do what you're talking about, but I took what I think is a sensible option. And again, not financial advice, is there are companies out there which you can buy shares in, and all they do is exist to buy shares in other companies.
Right.
And what's quite nice about them, it means if you don't have a large amount of money, your one share is actually spread across lots of other shares. So the company I was buying in, I knew their track record. I know there's a fund manager running it. They're buying and selling every day or every quarter, whatever rate they work on, and have a good track record. And these companies, you can basically buy shares in it, and they do all the work for you, and they take a slice.
Yeah.
So what? Huge slice.
So you're giving them money, your money, to invest on your behalf, and they take a cut.
So, and yeah, if it goes up 5%, which is quite a good return at the moment compared to cash in the bank, they take 1%, and the risk is much lower compared to just going and putting one company that you absolutely guarantee you can predict the future on, which you can't. You absolutely can't. And that's what's basically happened here.
Yeah.
I know it's a massive outside one. And actually I think there's a real issue at the moment with people investing on sentiment and thinking things will go up for the wrong reasons. And one of the shares I really don't like how valued it is and people getting obsessed by it is Tesla.
Right.
And I will say this because, Matt's already talked about how it used to be underlying worth that defined stock price. Now it's about how much money's flowing. Tesla is now valued, and don't track it every day, but more than the rest of the entire car industry together.
Whoa.
Now, they do have other products than cars, batteries, which might have other uses. But for Tesla to grow from where it is today to be the entire car industry, I don't believe it's possible. I think if anything, cars are going to reduce in the future. Even if they don't, even if cars keep growing at the current rate, are you telling me there'll be no other car company in the future but Tesla? That doesn't make sense to me. And to me, that means most of that share price is sentiment.
I would agree wholeheartedly. In fact, I was reading a transcript of the investor call that Musk did because they just reported their earnings yesterday. And the journalist reporting it mentioned that they still have yet to make a profit, or the only way they've made a profit thus far is because they sell regulatory credit to other car companies to offset their greenhouse gas emissions. In other words, a chunk of Tesla's profit isn't them selling actual things to actual people for money. It's them selling regulatory credits, greenhouse gas emissions offsets, like mileage basically, to the large car companies that haven't got their fleet up to standard. And they sell them, and they double sell them. They sell them in the US, and they sell them in the UK, and they sell them in Europe because they can do that. So the one car gives them 3 sets of regulatory income credits when they sell them in different markets, because there's not an international one. You're not allowed to only sell it to one car maker. You can sell it to, in each market, you can get away with doing that. And yeah, sorry, I know I'm a bit on a high horse here, but it bugs me.
No, and it was interesting because it was a few years back, and Tesla has grown a bit since then. Someone went to BMW, are you scared? And they just went, well, how many cars did Tesla sell? How many cars did BMW sell? And, we were talking about Tesla, I think, hadn't even made 100,000 cars at that point, and BMW were making that every week. It was these kind of numbers. And they just said, we will build that number of electric cars tomorrow. We have the factories. We roll out new models of car all the time. They were not scared at all. The only thing maybe is true about Tesla is they have some better software and some better batteries and these things, and those things matter. But the other companies had the confidence that they had enough money to play catch up. And I would argue, as someone who's owned electric cars, I've owned 2 Nissan Leafs. Everyone goes, oh, well, Tesla made electric cars a big thing. I bought a Nissan Leaf before Tesla really people cared about. I drove them for 8 years. I've only sold it because we're in a pandemic and I don't need it. And I would say there are other car companies who are making just as good progress. They were just 20,000, 30,000 pound cars, not 50,000 to 150,000 pound cars.
How's your horse doing, Matt? Do you need to climb back on it, have one last gallop?
No, I think I'm pretty good because I agree with what Dr. Andrew said. Tesla is very much hype, The only and you know, again, you read accounts of stuff and you're like, okay, so they're like, they make a product, they sell a thing, but it's not like they make the best product, not like they make the best thing. And Gina in the chat says they went from 80 to over 800 now, and this really makes me think very much of the early days of Amazon. But not every company that had looked like Amazon succeeded, and so I think there is a little bit of a cult like Tesla Musk worship thing going on here. And I just believe they're much more vulnerable to the big car companies,
Okay.
as Dr. Andrew says, because they have the money and the expertise, and they could turn out 10 times the volume of cars than Tesla ever has.
Okay, explain this then, you men of science and financial knowledge. Right? If the share price of Tesla is high, does it matter? Is it even related to the company and what they can do, or is it just a token of what rich kids and bankers are trading with each other? They're basically, their Pokemon cards are worth more, but does it affect the company?
Yeah, it can, because the share price, if the share price is high enough, it lets them buy other assets. If it's low enough, it exposes them to the potential of being bought out or taken over by, you know, vulture firms, for example, or other car companies. So it can matter. It can matter to a great extent what your share price is. But you're right. If I'm in Wall Street Bets, what you said is completely true. The share price is no longer, and they would argue never was, really attached to the fundamental value of the business. It was always about what you convinced people your firm was worth in the future.
I think for me, one of the things I like to explain to people about shares, and again, simplifying for clarity, I have a company. It's privately owned by me. I want to raise some capital. So this is what Facebook did many years ago, releasing shares. And I'm going to release 100 shares and see what people buy them off me for. And I'm going to keep another 100 shares to me, so I own half the company, so I never lose control of it. Because if someone has the majority of the shares, they own the company or control of the company. I sell them for £100. I get £100 into my bank account of my company, and those people have their shares. If I never buy them back, if I never do anything with them, if I never play a dividend to them because I decide I don't want to, because I don't have to, because I still own half the company, those shares are only worth what someone will pay for them. They give you voting rights at AGMs, at annual meetings, but if they own less than half the shares, they're never going to win the votes. And you look at this, and you can run a company like that forever, and all you've done is a bunch of people giving you their money on the fact that they will play these on the stock market.
Right.
What, of course, might happen is, say someone wants to I retire, I get old, and I sell one of my shares. Then someone else goes, I want the other 50, so I get the controlling stake.
Then the price goes up as
Then
they try to buy it all up. Right.
But in reality, shares themselves can sit forever, having no value. And if there's no obligation to pay dividends, as I said. Some shares don't even get voting rights if you choose to deliver them that way. And you can actually get really weird situations. So people think they're worth a lot more than they are.
Okay. Spanners Ready Media, all right? And because somebody said to me a few years ago, I will give you, in fact, I can't remember the exact figures, but it was a few grand. But what I want a percentage of profits and revenue. So that whilst I'm not paying dividends, the shares can come attached with a share agreement, I guess, a profit
You
share.
can have any contracts you like.
Oh, right. Okay.
As long as your contracts, you can't have a contract to murder someone, but
So why would someone buy shares in Spanners Ready Media if there's no profit? You've just owned the share, and I'm not obliged to give you dividends. Why would I pay out dividends to Spanners Ready Media shareholders?
Because that basically says I've invested and own a part of the company. So let's say Spanners Ready Media never pays a dividend, but let's say we take over the world. We become the next Whisper Films, and we run all of Formula One from Biggin Hill.
I can see it.
And we get old, and our wives complain enough, and we say, you know what, it's time to retire and own a little go-kart track in the countryside and go race every day and do our little show.
Outdoor.
Go back to our roots, not work too hard. When we sell that company, the people who own the shares get some of the money it is sold for.
Right. So they own it. But like Dr. Holding says, if we never sell it, then it just becomes Pokemon trading cards.
It becomes they can sell that share to somebody else. And if we've made that big of a step forward, presumably the share that they paid us £10 for is probably worth a bit more if we run all of F1 Media, for example.
400 billion a share. There we go.
Yep.
Yeah.
And earlier brought up in the chat regarding share price, better share price also allows you to do more borrowing. So I can borrow $2 or $3 billion from a bank if my share price is 800.
Yeah.
But if it's $3, the bank may not lend me that money to keep my business running.
$300 billion buys you 2 NVIDIA 3000 series graphics cards at the moment. So, yeah, that would be really useful. Dr. Holden.
The other really interesting point that comes out of it is when people talk about Bezos or Elon being the richest man in the world, most of that's in stocks and companies we've been talking about. So they're not the richest person in the world, because if Bezos decided to sell all his Amazon shares tomorrow, the share price would collapse. So it will take him a lifetime to liquidate those billions of pounds worth of stocks.
That's interesting.
Which probably will be longer than the lifetime of Amazon just going by.
So they're worth a lot because he owns a lot. So he's inflating the share price and therefore his own apparent wealth.
So the phrase is illiquid. You cannot rapidly get rid of it. And this is the other reason why if you talk to financial experts, they don't like buying property. So you and I might say property is great because you can get rental income, you can do this. But if you're a stockbroker and you have a house is a really hard thing to sell rapidly. A good share is easier to sell. There'll be points where you can't sell your share and then actually they end up being worthless.
Which fascinatingly was the genesis of the 2008 financial crisis, because back in the 80s and early 90s, Salomon Brothers figured out that they could bundle mortgage payments in different tranches and sell them essentially as bonds, not shares, but kind of the same idea, on Wall Street. And at first, this was a brilliant idea because the payments were very regular, and massive holders of bonds, like, pensions, industrial pensions, needed super safe investments. And the mathematical model showed that, the first 5 years of payments are the safest by far. But as they had more demand for that product than there was product, they began to open up the rules for who could get a mortgage and what kind of a mortgage they could get. That ruined all the math. And eventually there came the moment when the house of cards collapsed, and that happened in 2008.
The other interesting thing about that mortgage and subprime market thing was it also shows how we often talk about stocks being independent. But if you have a street of houses and your debt's all wrapped up in that street, when one house goes, it is an independent thing. When all that's my doorbell. When all the houses on the street go, you now have all the properties crash in value as well. So if I fail to pay my mortgage, my bank will just sell the house to someone else and get the money back. If the whole street collapses or the whole town,
or the whole market,
no one will buy those. So the security of mortgages, which is on the property, suddenly no longer becomes an independent thing because it's tied into the whole estate. And that's really what was a big kicker for those subprime markets, was actually they needed to prevent them from defaulting. And had they just said, right, we'll give you mortgage holidays and stuff, they probably could have made it a lot less painful for themselves at a short-term loss over a longer-term one.
Yeah, and the mortgages themselves got so mixed together and spread out across all sorts of different institutions that people were frequently left not even knowing to whom they should send their mortgage money when they could afford to pay them. But you're correct. It was the fundamental loss of property value that precipitated the crisis, and that happened when enough people couldn't pay their mortgages, that the people who owned those securities started to lose money. And then it was all interlinked and it all came down.
So that explains the difference between how to buy a house in the 90s and trying to buy a house like when we did 6 or 7 years ago. So in theory, I was with the company for whatever it was, 12, 15 years at the time. I'd been working my whole life, a family man, settled down. I should have been the prime candidate for buying a house. Yet they made it so difficult. My wife was teaching and a musician, which their banks don't like that at all. But we should have been the prime candidates, and yet they lent us so little compared to our income. It was horrible. But my dad, rest his soul or whatever, but he was a shocking candidate for a mortgage. He couldn't hold down a job. He was frequently unemployed. Yet not only could he get enough money to buy a decent house, get lent a decent house, he couldn't afford the deposit, so they would then give him a loan for the deposit and pay that loan back on a separate deal. And is that the reason then that they were throwing mortgages at people, was because of, they were just playing games, with everybody's life. And then now we're paying the cost of it, I guess, Andrew, because everyone's scared to do that now. So even someone fairly reliable is like, yeah, but you need your entire year's wage as a deposit.
The other problem, and this is possibly UK specific, is house prices in the UK have got so high. Your parents were probably borrowing 2-3 times salary. We're now what?
Yeah, about
5
4,
to 10
about 4,
times. Yeah, so you can easily borrow 10 times salary here, and that means you're a much higher risk at, and that's the difference. But interest rates were higher back then, so it's a.
No, hang on. I'm going to take offence at that, because I'm a risk. I've been paying rent happily for 15 years or whatever it was at the time, and the rent we were paying at the time then is 50% higher than my mortgage now. So I have got a track history of being able to pay a certain amount of money every month, and yet they still needed to hold my feet over the fire.
And the more money you have, the lower the interest rates will be, and the cheaper the mortgage. So
I can't have more money because I was paying rent. I was paying rent. That's why we didn't have money. Trumpets.
That's the trap. And you're right. We have lived our whole life paying rent well in excess of a mortgage on a property of a similar property. But if you don't have that magic 20% down payment, then you can't get in the game, so to speak. I mean, there are little ways around it, but it costs you a lot more money to play that game. And when my dad bought our house I grew up in the early 70s, he was making, I think, $14,000 a year teaching at university. The house cost $30,000. If I wanted to buy a property similar to the one I live in now, it would cost me $1 to $2 million. and so you see the scale, the disparity in scale. But to go back to the mortgage collapse, the same cycle played itself out in the junk bond collapse too. It was originally a useful financial product that when they ran out of financial product, they started creating more of it.
Yeah.
That was less reliable as a result.
So they created the misery just so that they would have something else to play with. Now, I'm learning so much, Andrew, but I'm fully angry now. I'm fully triggered.
Well, one thing I find interesting as well is, because people have commented about this, is Mike saying buying a house for 3K and now it's 530,000. A lot of the people who say they didn't make a huge money on property go, oh, but the interest rates were high. And I said that. But that's kind of the 1970s to 80s where pound just devalued massively, so they did pay the interest. And if you look at how much the value went up to how much interest they paid, they're basically covering the cost of the change in the value of the pound. What was absolutely unbelievable was the increase in house prices, I reckon, in probably the 90s through to now. They just seem to be exponentially increasing. They're just skyrocketing. And
why?
I think even in my lifetime of owning, they nearly doubled in price.
Okay, why?
Lack of building houses in the UK.
Okay. Well, the thing is, won't it all go down now, because the government is offering to pay people money to quote unquote go home and to repatriate. I live in a country, by the way, just in case anyone not living in the UK, I live in a country where the government is offering foreigners money to go home. So just so you know, incentivized repatriation is a thing in the country I live in. But yeah, so won't that drive the prices down?
Well, there's lots of things going on. So one of them is the government's low interest rates mean people are borrowing more, which means because there's demand, the prices just go up. So our low interest rates aren't helping. But you won't win. If interest rates go up, you'll still pay. You just pay interest instead. The lack of properties isn't helping. But there's also the fact that UK property is seen as a sound place to launder money or to invest. So there are huge numbers of properties in London owned by people from overseas who have a lot of money they want to hide from their government. That may be legitimate reasons, or it may be laundering reasons, but there are governments out there who do not like you having a lot of money and will try and take it off you. If you can hide it in another country's property, it disappears. And that's why London has a huge number of empty £1 million properties. These skyscrapers are full of properties, is foreign investors. And I think the same happens in Toronto with Chinese money. I mean Vancouver. Get my right part of Canada. And I suspect there's other parts of the US this happens. It's just a way of hiding money. And whilst the UK's out of the EU, I suspect that's going to go up because we've got quite a good history of having quite tolerant financial laws on overseas investment.
All right. Well, I think we've skirted around a few topics there. That I circled the drain. I nearly went full on political triggered there. But look, we'll save ourselves. And anyway, when we launch our new show, the Spanners and Trumpets political argument show, I'm fully on the baddie side, right? For that, I'm on the.
Well, it depends on the listener now, doesn't it?
Well, we need both, you see, and whoever wins, we'll see what kind of listenership we get. If we get increasingly right or left wing, we'll just move towards that for sheer clicks and for profit. I don't see any flaw in that. That should be fine.
None at all. What could possibly go wrong?
I've learned so much today about the money. Like, I'd never intended it to go on that long. I had loads of other topics and scam topics lined up. But I was like, oh, these two know what they're talking about. I'm just going to ask them questions. And I know we've got people who know about finances in the live chat, and they're not yelling at us that we're wrong and stupid. However, if you're listening to this or watching after the fact, and you want to inform us more and correct anything, that's fine. spannersready@gmail.com. That's how emails work. Yeah. mattpt55@gmail.com. Dr. Holding can be contacted on Twitter @AndrewHolding.
Yep.
You should change it to @Dr. Andrew Holding. You earned it.
Well, I get enough stick for putting it in the bit above my name. Every so often people comment on it.
What do they say? Like, oh, you're an MD, not a doctor.
I'm not a real doctor. I might confuse people. The fact that you can click on it and it tells you what I do for a job, that's too much for some people.
But the whole it's Dr. Andrew Holding joining us on Remain Indoors lends us credibility. So I'm going to champion that you get to do that. Anyway, for now, it's @Andrew Holding. He's got a Twitch channel because Dr. Holding, during the day, mild-mannered Dr. Holding cures cancer for a living. But by night, he streams on Twitch playing very old Star Trek games.
Yep. So I'm actually doing it tonight. I'm going to be playing a bit more of Star Trek: The Next Generation of Final Unity. I don't know how much we got left, but we were doing it before Christmas, and I've got everything set up.
Well, if you give me a link, I will put it in the Remain Indoors show notes. So if you're listening to this on the app, there should be a link there to click on Dr. Holding's stream. Matt has been, as I teased earlier, has been part of the F1 subreddit editorial team, and you've just produced your first bit of work with a team of writers helping you out there as well. So how do we get people there? You can share a link in the show notes too.
I can give you a link to the article in the show notes. How about that?
Let's do that. All right. Well, that sounds good. Everyone's got to plug their stuff. I didn't get overly angry. You can follow me @SpannersReady. I'm the best one. @IndoorsRemain on Twitter. iRacing podcast we do. All in the show notes. Spanners 90s Radio. Go listen to that. It's got music in it. And we are not through the tunnel yet. So stay safe, work hard, be kind, have fun, remain indoors. Meh. That's all right. We'll call that the end